So good evening. I know so many of you saw the topic. Others of you may have been dragged by your friends. Who knows? But welcome. And today we're going to be talking about loving your products, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So many of you might not necessarily talk about your products in an emotional way, but it turns out we're very emotional beings, and so are a lot of the people we work with, including our customers. So we want to really explore, how do we use this to our advantage? How do we avoid the pitfalls? For those of you who haven't seen me speak before, just a little bit about me before we dive right in. I have a number of years of experience working at places like Amazon, Google, was director of product at Zazzle. I've also trained many of the Fortune 500 companies over the years to up-level their product teams and their offerings. Now I act as a personal accelerator working with both those teams in a corporate context as well as individuals like yourselves to land those jobs that you so desire. Well, with all of that, so again, I've worked with many people like you, whether it's to get that new job right now or to up-level in where you're at today. Because a lot of what it takes to be a high-impact product manager or someone who works on a cross-functional team building product, it takes a lot of skills from both people and technology. And I always talk about my background, since it's in cognitive science and computer science, being very much the marriage of people and tech. So that's the world we live in today, and we want to understand how to better navigate that in this talk as well. So by the end of this session, you will be equipped to make solid decisions for your product despite emotions. So despite the emotional influences that will come into play, whether it's your boss screaming, saying, do this now, do this now, do this now, P.S. we're staying all weekend, or your customers freaking out, or people saying this is the best thing ever, I'll send you this case of wine, just give me this feature, whatever exactly is going on. Really understand how to make solid decisions. We also want to be able to use those strong emotions to your advantage and to your product's advantage, to your team's advantage. So having people who are invested in what you're doing it can have its pitfalls, but it's also something very powerful. So we want to understand how to leverage that. And then we also want to have specific strategies for choosing a product. So when you're deciding what's the next thing you're going to work on, whether it's in a product management role or otherwise, you fundamentally are working on something in your job. And so how do we make sure that what you choose is really great for you and your overall growth in your own career? So with all that, very meta, what is love? Love can be a lot of power. Love is very powerful in the sense that when someone has very strong emotions about what you're working on, for example, they're very invested. You get a lot of emails, phone calls, a lot of intrigue about what you're doing. Your supervisors, maybe it's even up to the C-level, are very engaged in knowing exactly what you're doing, often also exactly what you're not doing. But, they're constantly asking you questions, giving you feedback. And that's one of the benefits when you have your customers particularly emotional about your product. That can be a big benefit because you're getting a lot of feedback from them. So you want to leverage that, and you want to really, again, utilize this captive audience that you have, whether it be your coworkers, your executives, or your customers. However, on the other side of this, love is also very blind. So it turns out when someone's really invested in you doing exactly what they want you to do, this is often not a full context decision. I'm curious, how many of you have had something that you thought was so beautiful? It was the perfect UI, the best color, the wonderful flow. The data just, was set up so superbly. It could scale to anything. You felt like this was totally perfect. Have you had that experience where you're like, what I designed is really good. This one's really good. Some of you are like, I don't even want to say this. And even when even go mediocre people, how you doing over here? And then how many times when you thought something was really good, did it go to market and you were like, oh, apparently it's not that good. People don't actually use it. How many of you have had an experience where you worked on something and it didn't end up going anywhere? I know, he's like, I think all of us would say yes. So what I always say is, if you don't say yes to that, you're either lying or you haven't done enough stuff yet. So those are your options. But this is definitely a challenge where people get really fixated. And I'm sure if you haven't already, you will have an experience where an executive is like, the button needs to do exactly this or look exactly this way. And you're like, but the research says, but the data says. And this is where when someone's really emotionally involved and invested, things can go a little awry. The same can happen with your customers. So it's easy to say, oh, well, the CEO, the whatever, like super high level person, they just don't get it. But even with your customers, I will say to you, it's funny. I remember when Google had bought Doubleclick, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Doubleclick. Are you guys familiar? Is anyone not? Okay, so for those of you who aren't, it's basically, and now it's like Google Ad Manager again. It's had a number of iterations, but Doubleclick was a company that started visual ads like as a big platform. So all the picture ads that are on the web, video ads, they really owned that market for a good 10 years, and then Google bought them, and it's like continued to expand from there. But one of the things that was really interesting, they started as a startup in New York City, and they started a long time ago. So in the system, when you were setting up new users, there was a option when you were setting up a new platform for a client, because this is like, say, the New York Times wants to put picture ads across their across all of their content. This would be the system that would serve it. And there was an option in there that basically said AOL hack. It was like, do you want to enable the AOL hack? So that was interesting. Obviously, this is some time ago. This is when AOL was a really big account. So I'm curious, if you had this system that you're setting up, there's 500 permissions, 500 different configurations that you can check on and off. And you see one that says AOL hack. And obviously, there was a lot of effort put into creating this thing. I'm curious, how many publishers in this case do you think used that AOL hack? None. So like not even AOL, right? So AOL had like sent this list of demands. It was like, oh, we want all of these things. We want, you know, the ads to like whatever, auto disappear, reappear, whatever it was, right? This set of things that probably made no sense to the product person listening on the other side at the time. But they were like, huh, you send us a lot of money. We'll totally do this. We're definitely doing this. And then they do it and it's like, well, oh, the dude didn't know, like he doesn't design products. He just has problems. So if you just listen to exactly what he's describing, and he's like, if only this system could, you know, put this checkbox from over here to over there, then my life would be so much easier. Turns out usually the ideas that users have are often really stupid, but they have real problems. Love is blind. So if I really even love the system, love or hate, they're often two sides of the same coin, and I'm really expressive to you about like what isn't working and what I need, it can lead us down that AOL hack path where nobody uses it, and a whole lot of man hours went into that whole thing. So we want to avoid that. And one of the things you're going to need to keep in mind, there's a phrase that is heavily used in writing, and it is kill your darlings. Kill the thing that you love and created. How does that feel? You're like, it's beautiful. I worked on it all weekend. I haven't slept in 72 hours. I want to ship it. But apparently no one wants to use it. That is the situation that you are going to end up in often, whether you're directly in a product role or product adjacent roles, where you're working on things where you feel like you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into this particular feature, into this implementation, and you're going to have to make these very hard decisions. Can anyone think of an example where they've had to do that? Closing off the whole project. That's always a great time. Yeah, I mean, I remember there were things that happened that ended up being like expose in books and whatever, where we, like at one point, we worked on recreating search. Like we had search team that we sent down to Palo Alto because apparently like search engineers at the time were all in the Bay. So we sent them all down. But then we said search really sucks because it did at that point. So we tried to recreate search. That project did not go well. Having two teams competing within a company to create the backbone of search for the product, not the best strategy as it turns out. Certainly antithetical to how Amazon works. And, you know, the whole thing, like the whole team ended up totally imploding. So that's always a very good example of when lots of darlings have been killed, lots of things that people thought were really promising at the beginning have had to go by the wayside. And there are reasons for that. So you'll have to make these tough calls at some point in your career. But let's figure out, how are we going to do that? What kind of decision-making framework can we use? Because we fundamentally are emotional beings, and we work with other human beings who are also emotional beings. It turns out people have all kinds of different emotions, right? And for all different reasons. So, they might have issues around like being really invested in something, or their ego is somehow tied up in the thing that they're presenting. Have you ever found that someone's like, to you, you're like, why are you so attached to this? Because you're just like, dude, I just don't think it's good. Like, I don't think it's going to fix the problem. And they're just like, but eat it, have it, make it, I don't care. Have you run into that situation before? So that's the thing. It's going to constantly come up because it's actually a benefit to working with people who are really engaged. When they're really engaged, they really value and take pride in their work. But it turns out you end up with this mess of things where, someone's like not sure, another one's totally freaked out, another one's like, my plan is great, let's definitely do it. And all of them are in a meeting with you. And you've got to somehow get all of these people together onto the same page so that you can move forward with your product. And now for those of you who haven't necessarily been in this game too long, and even as a reminder for those of you who have, I just want to give you a sense of the realm of people that we're dealing with. Because you might think, oh, the product manager makes the decisions, or the CEO makes the decisions, or whoever you think makes the decisions. But even though these people tend to be like the on paper deciders, right? C-suite, maybe investors, customers, partners, all of these individuals, like from engineers to marketing, product, support, customer service, like HR, legal, all of these areas in some form or another are significantly influencing the way your product gets shipped and delivered. For example, it was funny, I was talking to someone recently about how, I would just say at Google, since there has been a new CFO put into place, decisions on how financial matters get dealt with have changed. So the way you might get funding is a little less like, what did you want? Sure, here's a blank check. And a little more like, what are we doing? We're big adults now. We're going to actually watch where the money goes. Now, it turns out if the way you get your funding substantially changes, is that going to change what you end up working on as a product and as a team? But like, would you think to yourself, I want to do organizational change. Let me target finance. Typically, no. I would say typically that's not going to be the traditional place that we start, but it's something that can materially impact the whole company and the way the product runs. So I just use that as an example of how all of the different players in this honeycomb substantially impacts the ultimate outcome that you get with your team, and wherever you sit in it, it's going to impact you. So one of the core things that is needed in product management, and I generally would say in your career overall, regardless of whether you're a product manager today or plan to be, is empathy and connection. So really understanding for each of those players, where are they coming from? What values do they have that is leading to the conversation you're having right now? Why is this person saying like this is the absolute needed feature, flow, etc.? So for example, if you're talking to someone who does QA, they're going to be really concerned about the quality. Versus in the sales org, they might not talk about quality at all. And they're just like, what was the last contract that got signed? How much was it? How much is the next one? All of these things are interdependent. We can't have really bad quality and continue to sell really big contracts. They need to work in a symbiotic way. But the way people focus is going to be totally different across the organization. So we want to really understand for each player, where are they coming from? Because generally it's, impacting what they're presenting to you. And I just want to specifically talk about some of the ways that decisions get made in a company. And I want you to think about, as we go through this, with where you are today, how are decisions getting made? So title and power. This is a very common way that decisions get made, where people will often say the highest paid person in the room, often talked about as the hippo of the room, they are the person who's going to make the decision. And a lot of times that creates a very specific culture where people are just like, just tell me what you want. I don't care what the people said because you don't care. So just tell me what you want and I'll just go do it, even if it's dumb, and we'll find out it's dumb later. I will say that's very likely to have been the origin of that AOL hack that we talked about earlier. Analytics, or maybe more specifically, some kind of ROI metric. But fundamentally, looking at metrics and analytics, that is traditionally when people talk about data-driven organizations, that's the kind of stuff that they're looking at. So again, is that the currency that's being used for decisions in your organization? Or is it valued at all? I mean, these are real questions because on the one hand, we can sort of blanketly say data-driven is best, like let's do that. That's like the trend of where things are going. But in any given team or product or company, that may or may not be how decisions are getting made. Strategic value. So there's definitely an issue where sometimes when you're going to look at a particular metric right now in the short term, it's not going to look good. But there's some longer term goal. There's some trend that's happening overall, some shift that's happening in the space that you're operating within. And you see that long-term benefit looks like a bigger bang for your buck and a bigger ROI in the long term. A lot of times in consumer space or in where you have a set of discrete users, they'll talk about things like lifetime value and what does it look like for a given customer over the long term? How valuable are they to the company? That's a very powerful metric. It's a very difficult one to be accurate about because you're looking at things with a changing climate. So again, that's an example where the right now metrics might not lead you to the overall decision that you want to be making. Policy or compliance. It's definitely something that plays a role in every organization, but in certain organizations even more so. So if you're working in finance, healthcare, like certain industries, those organizations might live or die by compliance. I mean, if you are a big bank and you're just totally, I don't know, just getting rid of money, losing money, spending money, like, oh, was security an issue? I don't know, whatever, PCI, SHMCI. Like, you can't do that as a bank and continue to really exist. So those kind of features might be in that situation or in that organization might funnel to the top all the time because that is considered to be such a big issue. Consensus. How many of you have been in a situation where decisions were made by consensus? Who loved that? Interesting. One. She was like, wait, no, loved it. No, put it down. Well, I don't know if you're thinking just yourself. Sometimes it's just you. You're like, I see both ways. I don't know. Which way do we go? 2 is more than enough to disagree. And then once you get beyond that, you're like, there's never going to be a complete consensus here. We're never going to all agree. So with that in mind, this kind of leads often to this last point, which is seldom an explicit methodology, but it's often the reality in which people live. When you're operating by consensus, and we know that people generally don't all agree, then this often leads to some kind of deferment or not deciding. Has any of you been in a situation where you keep having the same meeting again and again? Yeah. What should we do with the terms and conditions? Well, there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. Cool. Let's talk about it next week. What should we do with the terms and conditions? You're like, whole companies have been created and fallen within the time frame that we're just discussing terms and conditions, or whatever the specific example is. So those, again, well-meaning, like a lot of these things can be well-meaning in terms of consensus. Yes, I want everyone on board. There are methods that you can use, even though we might say, okay, like we don't agree. That's okay. We're going to decide on if you're right, here's my contingency plan. If I'm right, this is how it's going to go. Let's experiment. Let's try. Let's look at metrics. Let's defer to other types of decision making so that we don't get stuck. Because one of the biggest challenges in business is getting stuck. And any of these methods can lead you into getting stuck place. So you want to, again, strategically choose what you're going to use in what context so that you can continue to make forward progress. So I want all of you to take a minute and think about where you are today, or if you're in between positions, in the last place that you operated, in the last place that you were working. I want you to take a minute and think about what method were they using? How did it go? What would you have preferred if you didn't think it was the best, most fantastic way of operating ever? What would you have preferred them to do? The other thing that I want you all to keep in mind as far as the question of how is your particular team and product working today and your company working today, how would you like them to be working? You might find in some of those answers that you and your company or team are too divergent, that this is not a culture fit, that you are all about the strategic value and the metrics, and they're like, cool, tell me a story. And you're like, cool, I have numbers. Give me that. And again, not that you can't tell a story with numbers, but that might be like a disconnect. If these, if the fundamental numbers aren't respected, that might be an issue. And you might say, okay, you know what? Can't keep doing this. Gotta go. So food for thought as we lead into how you're going to channel your energy. So again, we've talked about how teams can work on certain products, but for you, what do you need? Like, how do you get the things that you're intellectually intrigued by, as well as emotionally excited by, to be the thing that you're working on every day? I can't emphasize enough. And again, we're in a very driven place. You all are out here on an evening to learn more so that you can up level in your life and your careers. So if you are working on things that you don't like, 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours a week, that's a very painful place. So you really do want to get to this place where your head and your heart are totally in alignment, where you feel good about where you're going, what you're working on. Doesn't mean that you're expense reports, I love filling those in, right? Doesn't mean that every single moment is stellar, but if you overall feel good about the team, the mission, where you're going, common values, as well as how you're doing it, what you're specifically working on, the difference that you're making, that will change your life. So I really want you to keep this in mind as you're picking. The other thing that you really want to be able to do is pick something where you are completely obsessed with the customer, or you can become obsessed with the customer. You want to work on problems that you really want to solve. If you find something boring on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 365 is not going to necessarily look that much better. Or if you found it a little bit boring at first, you better quickly figure out how this is the most fascinating thing that you've ever tried to work out and how you really want to solve this customer problem. I will say sometimes challenges in particular come up on this in a B2B context. I see a lot of people struggling to work on B2B products because they're like, okay, it's a corporation. What do I do about that? So even there, for example, if you were working on something like Salesforce is a huge behemoth of a tool that can do so much managing different organizations, sales pipeline and flows and all of this. But again, if you were working there, you could potentially figure out, they have a nonprofit set of products. Maybe that's something that's really enticing to you that you care a lot about. Or maybe you're intrigued by small businesses and how individuals are trying to change their status and have a bigger impact on the world, and you want to have that be something that you can tap into because entrepreneurship is so meaningful to you. But whatever it is, you need to find within the thing that you're going to work on, whether it's consumer, B2B, even if it's in the government realm, whatever it is, you need to find something that you're really passionate about and can become obsessed over for it to really give you that ongoing value as an individual. And one of the things, again, because of what I do and when I help people, I just want them to be really served. To get to that awesome outcome where you're in a position, you're in a career that you feel really great about, we want to make sure that you're looking, yes, at the products and yes, at these things that we've talked about, but also more. Because I will say, I remember even when I was navigating my career early on, and I love products so much. A great product is like an amazing thing. P.S. equally pissed about all shit products, like very, annoyed when I'm like, I've built better. What are you doing here? So again, lots of feelings around product. But after a while, you also quickly realize if you have a great product area, but a team that you can't stand, it turns out the product doesn't make it better. So I will say most people end up concluding that their team and their manager are often way more important than the product specifics that you're working on. So you have to judge for you. It's not for me to say that that's going to necessarily be the case for you as an individual, but these are so important when you choose your next position, even if it's in your current company, if it's a slight adaptation to what you're doing right now, or someplace totally different. And again, all of this, like how does the company overall operate? Right? When we were having the discussion about making decisions and you're like, ooh, that conversation wouldn't have happened there. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you want to understand. What's the overall environment that you're operating within? Is it one that you want to be in? And then all of these things, I mean, they can sound trivial at first, like something like commute. You're like, duh, commute, whatever, like not a big deal. Until you're doing 2 hours like each way every day. And then you're like, now it's a big deal. Like now it's impacting my life pretty significantly. Location, do you want to be in New York, LA, San Francisco? Like, where do you want to be? What kind of vibe do you want to be living? To me, all of this stuff, and with all the clients who I work with, all of these things end up being so paramount. So while it's extremely important to understand how to build an amazing product, how to choose an amazing product, how to manage the team with that, we also want to take into account all of these different factors when we're choosing our positions or even designing our positions. Because a lot of times, I mean, when it comes to things like hours, which is a lot of times it's just about flexibility. Do you want to be able to work from home a bunch? Do you want to be able to work at different hours? Like, how is that going to work with your life? All of this is something that is not only delivered to you and is not only the culture that you're entering, but it's also something that you can set up as you go into a particular situation and say, well, look, it's really important for me that I see my kids every day, and so I need to be able to leave by 5. Or someone else might be like, so mornings aren't my thing, so I'm going to roll in at 12, but I'll totally stay till 8, 9, 10. Whatever it is to you, whatever you care about. Even on this side, like travel. I mean, for some people, travel is like, yes, I want to be able to travel. Like, it would be great if I could do that with my job. For others, they're like, I never want to see a plane again, and I'm not going. So again, it doesn't matter what side you're on, just that the thing that you're doing, the thing that you're working on, the position that you have within it, the company that you're at, and yes, also the product that you're on, is fulfilling the things that you most desire. So with all of this, I know we covered a lot. Let's recap. So we want you to have, and what we covered today is how you can get stellar strategies for making decisions so that you are strong with your customer, your product, your team, yourself, and ultimately that business as well. We want you to utilize having strong emotions from a position of power, whether it's your strong emotions, like that you're in love with a product and you want to navigate that, or the people around you. How do you navigate that someone's really invested, sometimes in a way that's really great, sometimes not? How do you use that to your advantage? And then fundamentally create an amazing career that's intriguing as well as fulfilling. You really want both of those things, because if you're bored mentally or you're not excited, then usually that's going to get old really fast. So we want to make sure both those things are covered. And so again, what you will need is to use that power of love. Remember, we said we've got power in that. We've also got that love is blind. So we want to use that power part and avoid the blindness that can sometimes come with that, so that we specifically use things like strategic approaches to make decisions. We covered a whole set of them. Perhaps the key is this, strategic plan, strategic thinking plus analytics. But whatever you decide is most important to you, I mean, you might say, no, I'm in finance. Like, if we screw up compliance, it's over. Make sure that box is checked. Whatever is most important, You want to have a way that you approach decision making so that, frankly, you can avoid that deferment or not deciding. When you have like an agreed upon methodology, it makes life so much easier and it helps you get further faster. And then finally, you want to find a problem in a customer that you can be obsessed with so that you can create a stellar situation where you continuously grow. And if you do all this, I swear to you, you will succeed. You will get into a dream position. You will have an amazing product. But I will say, if you want some help, like you can totally do this on your own. Take all of these things. I hope that they help you all. If you want to just take and run with it, awesome. If you would like some more help, then feel free to reach out because I can work with you on a free breakthrough strategy call to work through what's specifically going on for you. So you might be in a place where you're like, I'm just not quite feeling it. I'm not having the outcome that I want right now. And I want to invite you to do that since you were here with me tonight. And, hopefully I have inspired some thinking in you and hopefully up your game for yourself.